Welcome to everyone for joining us today for Healing from Homelessness. What do children and families need? I'm going to turn on my camera, sorry, and say welcome to you all. I'll invite our panelists to join as well. We're just thrilled that you've joined us for a conversation. We can see participants signing in. We know that number is going to grow. Let me begin by thanking those who have underwritten this event today, Seattle Bank, who has really stood up in a lot of ways this year to support Wellspring Family Services in the kind of work we're going to talk about today. And so I want to thank them and honor them, and also want to welcome our phenomenal panelists. It's really my honor, my privilege, my pleasure to host and to moderate this conversation today with three people who you all will be really thrilled to hear from, and I would imagine inspired to hear from. I know that I'm inspired by each one of them, not only in their daily work right now, and I'll introduce those roles in a moment, but also their careers. These are three people with remarkable careers, and I'd like you to get to know them better today and understand why they believe that healing from homelessness, what children and families need, is a critical conversation for each of us today. I'll begin by introducing Wellspring's Chief Clinical Officer, Danie Eagleton. We're thrilled that she joined us recently from Seattle Counseling Service. Our Chief Program Officer, Bevette Irvis, who has served in this agency for quite a long time, a very long time in early learning, and is really very well respected all across this region for that work. And then we are thrilled to welcome someone who was legendary and well known at the Odessa Brown Children's Clinic, and in more recent years at Childhaven, where he's been a leader as a clinician and a community member and an ethical leader for a long, long time. We're really delighted to have Mark Faduel welcome us. He is currently the Chief Program Officer at Childhaven, which is a critical peer organization of Wellspring. I also want to begin by thanking there's always so very many people behind the scenes who make this kind of thing work. You would think, wouldn't it be easy to sit and listen to Bevette and Danie and Mark have a conversation? And the truth is there are people in marketing and in development and in production behind the scenes who worked really hard to make this conversation possible today. So I want to thank all of them and tip my hat to them. Today we're going to get right into the topic because you didn't come to hear me. You came to hear these three great experts, and I'm going to invite them each to reflect in an opening question on the why behind this conversation today, both with respect to why in their career this has become such a critical topic to them, and also why in our community we need to take this topic seriously. I'm going to begin with Danie Eagleton, and I'm going to ask, why is the topic of healing from homelessness, in particular to children and families, why has this become important to you, Danie, in your career, and why does the community need to pay attention?
Oh, great. Thanks, Peter. That is a wonderful question. I would say my personal why is it's important. Always, even from my graduate work, I've always asked this question about what is it that it takes for someone who has a trauma background to be successful, or who's been traumatized? What does it take for someone to be successful or to move beyond that? And there are so many different pieces to that, but ultimately it is about the opportunity and the services that are provided for someone. And so I think when I think about my career and I think about the opportunities that I have had to be able to help people, it really comes down to a question, even for myself, is like, how can I make it better? Or how can I make it better than it was for me? How can I make it better for someone else? So either from like my time at Girls Incorporated, where I was working with parents, helping them with their girls, or when I worked in juvie, working with girls, or being a clinician and having those opportunities to really talk with people about how do they make it better? What's their recovery goal? The idea of homelessness is really about people being able to get to some type of transformation that works for them, some type of transformation that allows them to have the opportunity to have some control back in their lives. And so to me, that is incredibly critical. And it's really been a stream throughout my career in terms of how do I help people be able to do that. Why it's critical and crucial right now that community understand this is that we have an incredible opportunity coming out of a pandemic, hopefully, but this opportunity again to be thinking and redreaming and reimagining what our system of care really needs to be. And our system of care at this point in time needs to be a system of care that figures out and helps people to heal. And so what do those services look like? What does that conversation look like? And how do we help people to be able to do that? That's what I want community to be thinking about. That's what I want organizations to be thinking about. That's what I want my students to be thinking about in terms of how do we hold people in the way that we need to, so that they are able to recover.
Thank you, Danie. I struggled to find my unmute button there for a second. You'd think after 2 years in this pandemic I could figure that out. And when Danie just mentioned her students, I'll say for our audience that she's an esteemed faculty member at Seattle University. So that's what she's making reference to. She also has many students I know in other ways. She's a teacher and mentor throughout her career, but I think Seattle University is what she's referring to. Bevette, I'm going to ask you next. Why is this work so important to you in your career, and why should the community be paying attention?
Of course, well, I shouldn't say of course, because a lot of people may not know, the bulk of my career has been spent providing high quality early learning services to children, with the majority being children who have experienced homelessness. And so healing is crucial. It's at the heart of the work that I have been focused on for over the past 30 years, and so, children, of course, they come to early learning within the context of a family. So not only are we working directly with the children, but also directly with their parents. And, the majority have been impacted by various trauma and stresses in their lives. And, housing is just one of many stressors that they have, that they've experienced. And so, oftentimes, when people talk about homelessness or think about who is homeless, it's often the adults that come to mind. It's not young children. And I think a lot of people don't realize that young children are experiencing homelessness, and that's because the children are not seen. No one sees a little child out, in the street holding a cardboard sign, because, they're, again, in the context of their family, and they're staying with other family members, they're staying doubled up, they're in shelters, so they're not seen. And so children are impacted by trauma that's happening within their family, and they need a safe space to be able to express, make sense of what has happened, what is happening with them, and have adults that can hold them and hold that trauma for them while they're trying to understand and make sense of it. And so, of course, with young children, healing is the center. It's at the core of the work that we're doing. And so we often say that, the children's adult caregivers, they didn't have a program such as the Early Learning Center here at Wellspring to help them to make sense of the trauma that they had experienced in their lives. And so, then they grow with that trauma within them. And so we're trying to disrupt, buffer that trauma that young children are experiencing, while at the same time using the same methods that we're using with the children, with their adults, with their parents and adult caregivers as well, around their healing. And so as far, as community goes, I think most people in the community can understand that a lot of us have been impacted by trauma. And if we personally have not been impacted by trauma, we know people in our lives that have been impacted by trauma, and that healing is so important and crucial to our health and well-being, that how can we not focus on healing? And the families that I have worked with over the years, although they have been impacted by trauma, they don't want to be defined by their trauma, right? And so it's walking alongside alongside people in their healing with them, and providing the necessary supports and resources that they need.
Thank you, Bevette.
You're welcome.
Mark Faduel, as our guest, I want to turn to you and also give you a chance in your answer to say a word about Childhaven too. Those of us at Wellspring certainly know and value Childhaven closely, but feel free to slip in a word about your role and mission and how you work in partnership with Wellspring.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And just as a disclosure, Peter and I worked together at Seattle Children's Hospital, and I adored him then, and I adore him now. So thank you. Childhaven, just quickly, Childhaven started 1909 up on Capitol Hill, First Hill, and really was one of the first child care centers on the West Coast, and served single parents, which I'm going to assume, I hope I don't get myself in trouble in the first 2 minutes of talking. They were mostly mothers that were trying to work and needed a healthy place, as Bevette was saying, to grow and thrive. And through the years, it grew and grew and grew. And what attracted me to Childhaven was their ability to take a deep look at who the organization was and go, wait a second, we can do better. We need to be out in the community. We need to partner. We need to walk with, as Bevette said. And that was a massive facelift for an organization that had been around for over 100 years to go, wait, if we're really talking about the power of reflection, we need to do that internally. And so we have 14 service lines and sites in Renton, Skyway, Auburn, and Burien, and we have sold our Broadway building. For those that don't know, that's the big news. And that was another reason why I was so attracted to the values of the leadership at Childhaven, is that they said, wait a second, if we're really going to hit social determinants of health, we have to look at access. And access is not great for folks coming to, unfortunately, back up to First Hill and the Central District. In regards to your other two questions, Peter, I'm going to start with the personal side, and that is my biological family. I think we would have probably won some gold medals for ACEs score, and I know that's a weird way of saying it, but let's just say they struggled with a lot of adversity, and they struggled in a small town outside of Pittsburgh, Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, that was once thriving because of the steel mill, and then once the steel mill shuttered, all kind of stress levels went through the roof. And with that toxic stress came a lot of adversity for adults and for kids. And by the time I was almost 6, my mom had been killed, and I was adopted into the suburbs. And I didn't obviously write the script, but it allowed me to wonder, like, wait a second, why is my life so much different living in the suburbs than living in what was called the slums? And the only reason I'm with everyone today and to have had blessed to have the career I've had, was because of my mom being killed, believe it or not. And that's that makes you kind of scratch your head and go, all right, what is it then about, like Bevette, you were talking about resilience, and Danie, you were talking about like who gets through trauma and who doesn't, and so that made me think about the safety nets that we all need. And the one thing is, and this is the beauty of this conversation today, it's about connectedness, right? It's about relationships. And to be honest, I have not seen our country be so divisive and have such holes. And we can't leave out, racism and classism in this conversation. And there's no way healing is going to occur if we don't believe that we're all connected. Each one of us is connected. And I can't be thriving and successful if I know that there's people that don't have houses, that live in food deserts, that don't have access to medical care, that don't have access to good education, economics, etc. So I can't feel good about myself if I'm not fighting, for some type of social justice. And the beauty of that is, look around us, look at this panel, and look at many people in Seattle and the nation that are very aware of the inequities and are fighting the good fight. So to be honest, to me, it's really quite simple. We are as strong as each one of us are, and we will thrive as long as each one of us have the ability to thrive, and that's not happening currently.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to each of the three of you. I hope that our audience is feeling, and I imagine they are, the depth, the gravitas, the emotion, the sincerity of your responses. And to me, that opens up now this next conversation. And Mark, I will actually begin with you as our guest, so I'll ask you a second time. I'm curious about how we do this. I heard you use phrases like walking with. I heard you speak of connectedness. I heard you say safety net. I'm wondering the how of healing from homelessness.
Well, as dark as some of the stats look in regards to infant mortality in our country, in regards to especially kids of color and poor kids not being school ready, in regards to losing our young scholars, young folks of color scholars by third grade, there's all kind of stuff that we know that works. Once again, we need relational programs. What does that mean? We need to have more diverse work staff. We need to have folks from the community that have experienced many things, right? I have a list, and I'm going to go through some of the list quickly. We need to have better access to healthcare. Look at social determinants of health, right? We need to change our prison system in regards to not just prison, but juvenile detention, adult incarceration. We need to look at having a common language for social emotional wellness. Too many times, the more letters you have behind your name, the different language you speak, and then we really expect folks to understand it. I don't understand it. Like we can simplify this in a way that when you go to your doctor and you hear what the doc says, it's similar to where the early learning teacher, to preschool teacher, to elementary school teachers, we can have a common language and a common thread. And I honestly do believe that the system's not broken. I think it's truly set up to work the way it's been working. And that's where this conversation is about revolution. And I know people are probably like, oh, Mark, really? It is about revolution because it's changing the paradigm. It's changing the system. That's what Wellspring's been doing. That's what Childhaven is attempting to do. There's plenty of allies out there, but we are in a society that we have been pitted against each other because there's not enough resources. That is ridiculous. We're fighting the fight together. It should be reimbursed at a better rate. We need workforce hubs. We need to be able to have access for our young folks to get the training they need. That's not going to put them in debt. I go on and on and on, and no one's ever going to vote for me because I'm not going to run for anything. And yet we are in this together. We are absolutely in this together. And, there are things like integrated primary care. There's integration in regards to early learning, having doctors and nurses go into early learning. We need to train our early learning staff better. The only reason it doesn't happen is because it costs a lot of money and the turnover is so great. By the time you train them, a lot of folks leave, and that's not right. That's not right. We need to make sure that adults and caretakers are taken care of. And by doing that, we need to figure out how to make sure we have these home-based programs that can go into the community where kids and families live. Sorry, I don't want to take up too much of the time. But...
No. Please don't ever apologize, especially for speaking of revolution, of transformation, right? I mean, that's the work. That's why we're on a mission. In nonprofit organizations, we're not here to make a profit. We're here to make an impact toward a mission. And in Wellspring's case, that's to end the cycle of family homelessness. And that is a revolution, right? And this work. And when people are pitted against each other and when systems are designed to push people down, it is on us, right, to transform that. So I'm going to turn to Danie. Actually, one other piece. You said we're in this together, and I just can't miss that in Wellspring Family Services formal values, one of our official formal values is we're all in this together, and going right together with that is we take care of ourselves so we can take care of others. So I'm just going to call that out briefly at the end of your answer, Mark, as I transition to Danie. Because I'm curious, Danie, what works? Mark says we know what works. He's told us a little bit about it, particularly with your clinical lens. What works? And, if we are all in this together and if we are caring for ourselves to care for each other, how can we create a revolution around homelessness for children and families?
Oh my God, Mark, that was amazing. Let me just say that. Yesterday, I had the benefit to be able to hear Dr. Ben Danielson talk about behavioral health. And what he said was, behavioral health is justice. So let's talk about this and let's break this down. What works is about people being present, right? So it's a program. It's an opportunity to be able to be with someone one-on-one. It's an opportunity to be with people in groups. And the opportunity, again, when we talk about creating community, we have this opportunity to hold each other and to learn from each other and to also be witness. The truth of healing is that you cannot heal by yourself. it is about how you walk with people. So what are those opportunities? So again, when I think about it from my clinical lens, I want people to be able to have opportunity to work with people one-on-one, to work on their issues, to be in group, and to have practice. What practice is again, it's like, how do we relate to each other? How do we connect with each other? We don't have enough spaces for that. And we also don't have enough spaces when we're talking about children and families. And again, it's adults taking care of kids. We don't have enough opportunity for people to be held in those situations. We need to have more help and being able to help each other in our communities, in our schools, and in our organizations. We are missing some of these opportunities in our landscape of when we think about services. Our services are not set up to help people to continue the work, right? We have to be able to walk with people through their lives in different ways, but we have to understand that as we're creating services. So when I think about all of those things, I've been so blessed, and I'm so grateful for the opportunities that I've had to be able to walk with people on their own journeys and to be able to see them either come from homelessness and maybe come from being, living their lives with mental illness, to getting a job, to creating a home, and then creating a relationship. The idea of being out in community, not living with me in the agency, but to be out in community, but to know that I was there, and, you can come back. You can come back. But we just don't have enough, our systems are not set up in that way. And that is definitely a problem. We need to be able to do this. And I think that the other thing I would say, going back to what I started with, behavioral health is justice, behavioral health and being able to have access to services, to be able to understand that you are invited in. The idea when we talk about being trauma informed, it is about not being re-triggered. So what does that look like for people to walk into an organization and to get services? And are those services there? Are we inclusive? And what does that actually look like? I mean, those are the things I think about all the time. And those are the things that I really want to get into in terms of what is it that we need to create to have people to get to healing.
Bevette, what does this mean, on the practical? I mean, we're a bunch of adults using a bunch of terminology, and I just think about a 4-year-old in the classroom, a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old in the classroom, right, whose family is experiencing homelessness, has recently experienced homelessness. You get to watch teachers and therapists, and you're a teacher yourself, interact with children, healing from this trauma, through this trauma, to whatever comes next. Can you give us a sense of how do you see healing happen in a classroom?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Danie, Mark, I'm so inspired by all the things that you're saying, because it's so right on. Oh my gosh, a revolution is needed. So I think, with children, right, children express and experience trauma in various ways, similar to adults. So we have some children that might be more quiet and withdrawn, and then we have those that with really big emotions that takes the whole village to come together to support their needs. And I think one of the things I really appreciate about the Early Learning Center here at Wellspring is that we have always had a non-expulsion policy. So we do not expel children because of their big behaviors. We understand that they have been impacted by trauma. So when they come to us, they are going to come with their full self, right? And so whether, it's domestic violence or some other trauma related to immigration or other factors, when children come to us, they come into the classroom with all of that, trying to make sense of everything. So really appreciate as we all have been saying, holding families, holding children, supporting them. And for children, it's also supporting them in age appropriate means as well too. And so giving them the ability to express what's going on inside of them, however they express it, it's okay. Of course, it's not okay to, to hit someone. So we have conversations about that, but but then we understand why that is happening, and giving the children language around their feelings and their emotions and how their actions are impacting others. All of that is healing for children. So, seeing a child come in, whether they're quiet or withdrawn or having overt expressions, and over time, seeing them build community, build relationships with their peers, with adults, to the point where they're going from, punching someone to saying, I don't like that. You hurt my feelings. That made me upset. Or even or going to a teacher and said, so and so did something to me, and then the teacher saying, well, what is it that you need to do? And the child goes back and use their words and behave in pro-social ways with their peers. It's really rewarding to see that growth, that healing take place with children. And going back to what Mark was saying about having all the necessary support, here at Wellspring, we have a therapist that's embedded in the Early Learning Center that's able to provide one-on-one play therapy with children, as well as with group with children. And so that's really remarkable as well too. And again, a part of our no expulsion policy as well too is, we don't expel children out of the program for behavior. Well, we also don't take them out of the classroom and stick them in an office somewhere to be in timeout when they are expressing themselves and trying to make sense of themselves. Again, assistance goes into the classroom to assist the child, assist the teacher, because there are times where the teacher might need to leave the classroom because, going back to what Danie was saying, about their trauma history being triggered, or also, it takes a lot out of a teacher working with a child just under normal circumstances. But then when you have 3-4 children in the classroom with challenging behaviors, that can be overwhelming. So having the support to go in to assist the teacher, all of that is all a part of healing for the child, because we're going in, it's like, we see you, okay, someone's here to assist you. How can we assist you? And if a child needs to go out of the classroom, they're not being taken out of the classroom to be stuck in an office somewhere. Someone is with them, walking through the hallway, having conversation. They're visiting the front offices, and everyone is having a conversation with them, trying to get an understanding about what's going on with them, why are they in the hallway with their teacher, and then, when the child's able to self-regulate, then they go back and join their peers. I hope I answered your question.
You did, Bevette, beautifully so. And you also got me thinking about the chance for us to just shout out and thank our teachers. And I know they're actually not on this call right now because they're in the classroom. If I'm not mistaken, this is Teacher Appreciation Week. At least it's Teacher Appreciation Week at Wellspring. I don't know about worldwide, but at Wellspring it's Teacher Appreciation Week. And
it is worldwide.
Okay, I was hoping, but I know we're doing it. I know we're doing it here. And just when you said that about the teacher needing a break, I mean, a lot of us, we think about teacher, and maybe we think about some high school teacher, some elementary school teacher we had. I want our audience to absorb and take in the idea of pre-K teachers working with children experiencing trauma, willing to stay in the classroom with love and attention and support. Those are truly remarkable teachers. And so truly on Teacher Appreciation Week, all of you, those of you watching who are on the Wellspring staff, be sure to thank your peer teachers here in the agency. Those of you who know a teacher, or heck, write a thank you note to Wellspring. You just address it to teachers at Wellspring Family Services, 1900 Rainier Avenue South. I mean, they need to hear us say thank you. So please, by all means, thank our teachers. And with that,
I'm sorry, Peter. I just want to pick up one thing that Mark had said about third grade, which is so true. And so, we know here at the Early Learning Center that no matter how cognitively bright a child might be, when they get to public school, starting in kindergarten. It's that social emotional piece that, get them into trouble. And so that's why social emotional development is such a critical and crucial focal point for us here at Wellspring. I mean, we focus on all the developmental areas of children, but that social emotional piece is so key, because we know if they're, children, once they get to kindergarten, if they can't keep their hands to themselves, if they can't sit in the chair, if they can't speak this way, if they can't do this, those are those things that get them into trouble. And then that brilliance that they go to kindergarten with is not being focused on. It becomes about the behavior.
That
is
is
the pipeline to prison.
Pipeline to prison. Yeah, I'm going to repeat that just in case I cut you off there. Pipeline to prison. Yeah, the preschool to prison pipeline. When I heard Bevette describe that when I first came to Wellspring, I thought, people, that is something to be thinking about. So I am going to make sure our audience knows that these three experts they're so willing to field a question that winds up in the chat. I'm going to ask Saida, who's our fabulous producer of this event today, to keep an eye on those questions in the chat. And she'll just call them on out as, she'll curate and figure out some questions. But if you in the audience have always wanted to ask an expert who focuses on children and families healing from homelessness, you've got about 15 minutes right now where if you've got a great question, I know there's a wise answer. So please don't hesitate to ask a question. And I think all questions are good. All questions are good. So you feel free to toss it out there. I'm going to come back to you, Mark Faduel. You've watched Wellspring Family Services for a long time. You've seen this work. I'm curious, and if Danie or Bevette want to jump in on this same question from a different angle, go ahead. So far, this conversation is somewhat theoretical, right? I'd love to know a story of healing. I'd love to know a story about a child, a family, healing, because if I'm in this audience right now, I'm feeling overwhelmed by that word homelessness. And when you say children experiencing homelessness, I maybe can't even picture that. And I'm curious, Mark, if you maybe have a story, or maybe Bevette or Danie are willing to share a story about what this is actually like and something that gives you hope. I mean, really, when I ask for a story, I mean something. Tell us about healing. Who can share that with us?
Jump in quickly. Around 10 years ago, the Boys and Girls Club, Rainier Vista Boys and Girls Club off of MLK, this is when I was at the Des Brown Children's Clinic, asked if we could have one or two of our therapists embedded in their program. And they serve hundreds of kids. So it really is quite an amazing organization. The problem was, once again, they didn't have money and I didn't have therapists I could just hand out. And the short story is they have a beautiful soccer field and they had lots of kids that weren't coming to the Boys and Girls Club. And, this is where kind of innovation becomes fun. It's not easy, but it becomes fun. And that is, there's so many kids. We know that mental health is oftentimes a stigma in many cultures. So how do we destigmatize it? How do we make social emotional growth fun for kids? And so started a soccer wellness program and using soccer as a platform to teach social emotional skills or raise emotional IQ of kids. And so many of these kids, most of them from poor communities, most of color, if you have a little kid that is of color that is struggling with expressing big emotions, that's oftentimes look like they're a troublemaker. They're going to get punished, they're going to get suspended. And so, I think it's especially important for, these kiddos to really get the support and love and skills so that they can maneuver through what we're calling trauma or toxic stress. The short story is, I've been doing it for 10 years and have had a number of kids in it for a while, and have had a number of kids who their parents would come and say, we're living in a shelter. We've been in several shelters and my kids never played soccer before. And I was like, great, bring your kids in, right? And a lot of these kids, as Bevette said about the classroom, just really having a tough time with what we call emotional regulation and having tantrums and, kicking things and yelling and screaming, and watching over time that these are the same kids with consistency, with loving adults, with parents that, have to wake up and take them to the soccer pitch, with coaches that are now trained in social emotional coaching along with soccer. It's like integration in primary care. Now we have all these coaches, and we're seeing 40 kids or so, and it's those kids that we see that are able to follow directions and are able to communicate those big emotions in a way that's not going to hurt others or themselves. I know it's a bit of a vague answer, but we can do this healing work in all kind of venues, and we can do it in a way that's fun, where kids don't, it's not like you have to get diagnosed or pathologized, right? And there's all kind of creative ways of doing this work, and that's just one example.
I love that, Mark. I really do. Bevette, Danie, would either of you like to tell a story of healing?
Sure. I've been trying to figure out which story to tell, because there's so many different stories. But I think, of course, when it comes to healing, it's individual, and there is not one magic thing that's going to work for everyone. It's different. Because what I'm thinking about, thinking about a mom who was an immigrant mom. She got married at a very, very young age. Of course, her husband was much older. She had, I think, maybe four or five children. And so when she came to the early learning center, she was very disconnected from her children and around her parenting. And of course, she started having children at 14 or so. She was, a child herself. So a lot of developmental things for her, stopped and didn't actualize. And so one thing we noticed right away is that the oldest child was a runner. He ran out of the classroom. He ran out of the program. So that's when we all had to come together. And then we're noticing, oh, mom's not intervening in any way. This child is running away from her, running out into the parking lot, and she is just gone. So it's like, okay, all right, so we need to step in, because it's a safety issue, right? So when the child ran away, anytime he ran away from mom in the hallway, we were like, okay, stop. We're going to walk back. And so of course now, we're modeling for mom without saying, you need to, and we're like, we're going to walk back, and you're going to take my hand, you're going to hold my hand, and we're going to walk together to the door. When we get to the door, you're going to take your mom's hand, and the two of you will go out into the parking lot together, still holding hands, to the car. And so, we're having this conversation with the child, but we're also having a conversation with mom without saying it, to mom, right? And so, I mean, it took a while, even me chasing him around the building one night when he just bolted out the door, and I was like, oh my gosh, this child is going to run out into the street. And so, after time, after a while, then with that modeling, with that consistency, then the mom and the child developed a routine whenever she came to pick up. And also too, I mean, I think she really didn't know what to do. And in a lot of ways, she looked to the staff, the teachers for guidance in her parenting around what to do with her children.
Thank you, Bevette. I really appreciate that. And I promise to slow down and to walk and hold hands back to the classroom. I really do. No, I love that modeling, because it's also, without saying the words, you're showing us the dignity and the respect with which the Early Learning Center teachers and the leadership works to really confer dignity rather than kind of calling people out. We have a question coming from the audience. I'm going to wait until I can hear if Danie has a story to tell, and then there's a provocative question that's going to follow up on that, Bevette. But Danie, would you like to tell us a healing story?
I actually don't have a story.
Okay.
I have a question. Here's my question. It's a question for Mark and for Bevette. I am just really curious, going back to what we originally started talking about, what services, based off of what you've seen and the work that you've been doing, what services do you feel are missing and that you would like to see show up either at Wellspring or at Childhaven or just within the system, based off of what you see in terms of the needs that show up for you?
We're both looking at each other. There's a whole bunch of services, right? And I think, a couple things I would like to see, once again, more family and community voice dictating services, being that it's built in, it's to the DNA of organizations, that it's not just a town hall once a year and saying, all right, we got community voice, but how do we really bake that in? I love the idea of having kid advisory groups. Kids are brilliant, absolutely. Like, they'll say stuff and they'll be like, wow, that's cool. I like the idea of having more diverse researchers in universities, because I think a lot of though there's been improvement, I believe a lot of the evidence-based programs are not culturally sensitive at all. I like, I'll put a plug in for promoting first relationships. I think that it is out of UW School of Nursing, Barnard Center. It's magical, because the use of videotaping parents who feel like they're awful parents, and you just say, you know what, I totally understand why you wouldn't want to do it, but let's just take it for a test drive and we'll try it. And if you don't like it, then we don't have to do it. I've never had a parent not do it. They were all reluctant for good reasons, because of all the messages society and they said to themselves about being awful parents, etc. And then every parent does amazing stuff. Every parent does things that they have no idea how wonderful it is for their child. But to be able to videotape, how old am I? To be able to tape it and show them, right? Look, when you did this with your daughter, did you see her eyes light up? Right? And there's a whole brain science that you can tie to it. So it's programs like that that are culturally sensitive, that are easy accessible, going into the homes, going in the community, etc. So, Bevette.
Yeah, I know. What I've heard from my team, Danie, is that they've heard from families saying that they what they need around when it comes to their healing is to be able to connect with people that look like them, from their community, that understand them, because oftentimes I think they are referred, right, for counseling, and they show up and it's someone who they feel doesn't understand them, because they don't understand their culture, their background. And also that the spaces, if we're focusing on healing, then the healing spaces also aren't matching up with what they need, whether that's from a cultural standpoint, a racial standpoint, or even their family background. So healing spaces that, and going back to, I'm hearing Mark now saying, right? And so, people go to these spaces, but do they have a choice in setting up the space, right? And do they have input in setting up the healing space? And so I think that will that's important as well.
That is both a brilliant question, Danie, and fabulous answers, Mark and Bevette. I think that probably all of us are going to want Danie to answer that same question later, but we have some great questions from the audience. Danie, I am going to ask you your own questions, so you can be ruminating on that. But we do have some provocative questions from our audience. We have about 15 minutes left, and so I'm going to try to be efficient in bringing those out. One person asked, children can be mean, and, we kind of know that, and we were all kids, and we were probably all mean once in a certain way, shape, or form. So how do you support children who are working through their own trauma with defense mechanisms when they say and do things that are hurtful to others? And the questioner says, I'd love to say, oh, I know that they're just being children, but it does have an impact on the teacher, on the other students, on the community. So how do we do that? Bevette, I'm going to start with you.
Yes, children can say mean things, right? And a lot of times they really don't even understand what they are saying. They don't understand. I mean, as adults, we know what those words mean, but they don't in a lot of instances. And for example, you know, in the Early Learning Center, we have said, those of us who've been there for a while said, we've learned some really great cuss words from the children because, I mean, oh my gosh, the way they put words together, they don't make any sense whatsoever. But to them, it makes a whole lot of sense when they're angry, right? Because they see that when adults get upset, they say certain words and those words have an impact on people, right? But they have no concept of those words. So when children are saying things that are mean to other children, yes, it's having a conversation about it, not just with that particular child, but with the all the children in the classroom. And so that, given as I said previously, giving them more appropriate words to use. And so so if a child says something that's perceived as mean, then another child will have the words, the language to address that situation. And, for me, I've always loved working with the children that other people have challenges with. Those are the ones that have my heart. The children with the over challenging behaviors, because, again, going back, they just need somebody to love on them, somebody to understand them, somebody to hold them with their emotions. And after a while, you will see them making that turn. And that turn may not be in a month or 6 months. It may be 9 months to a year, but eventually you see that turn, and that light, and where they start standing up for their own peers. And that's just, yeah, of course, it's hard. It's hard, it's challenging, but it's really wonderful to see that when that happens.
Thank you, Bevette. And I think that answer also would underscore for our audience and for our board of directors and for our donors as well, why we care about caring for caregivers. There's a whole term, secondary trauma, right? And it's hard to be a teacher. And so I think another part of that answer, just to underscore, Bevette, where you're coming from, is we got to look out for each other. We got to take care of each other. And not everybody can do it all the time. And I think the questioner is kind of perhaps coming from a bit of that perspective. Danie and Mark, I will let one of you respond to this. I'll let you can kind of make eye contact across the Zoom and decide whose question this is. This is one about that word resilience, right? It's kind of a two-sided coin. And the person's curious, how do you address someone who dismisses trauma or the ability of trauma to implant at an early age, even in the womb? If someone dismisses trauma because they say, oh, but kids are resilient. And, that resilience word is a powerful word, but it also can get used, I think, in some destructive ways or some, dismissive ways. Who wants to field that one?
I'll start. The issue of resilience, I think that people get a little confused because resilience also has to be built. So if people don't have access or an opportunity to have resilience built, there's difficulty. I can share a small story of watching a girl in juvenile detention who came in who was 7 years old. And again, asleep, cherub, woke up, whoa, lots of stuff going on. And I spent the day trying to figure out how to get her out of juvie, and spent the day also observing her and her mom and understanding the story. And mom had had a difficult pregnancy and had a difficult time. And a lot of that showed up for this girl, her 0 to 5. And so I think one of the things that I learned from that is, again, it's about if people don't have access and they don't have what they need around them, parents don't and kids don't, they don't get that built for them. So resilience, I think, is something, again, that it does take a village, and it's very important in terms of how we grow and what happens for us. Mark, what would you add to that?
I think resilience, that whole concept has been co-opted. And I think it
Okay.
makes a lot of folks that, feel better just throwing out, ideas about resiliency and stuff like that. Once again, the power of love, the power of trust, the power of rapport, making sure there's access to high quality programs is so key. And this is kind of the thing that has been coming up. And this is what Wellspring and Childhaven, continue to work at. I think our country has an issue with intimacy also. Like this, if you're really going to be reflective and if you're really kind of going to take a stance of wonderment, which I think is a good thing, you're going to bump up against things in dark places within you that won't feel good. And then kind of like what you've heard from Bevette and Danie is like, all right, who's there then to help you with those things? And I think as organizations, we need to do it. As individuals, we need to do it. And that's where that true connection comes from. But we don't do a very good job, I don't think. And this is a generalization that someone could be saying, well, that's absolutely incorrect. But we're not a very intimate culture, especially with those that don't look like us or don't have the education that we might have or not have.
I love where this conversation is going. These are really profound comments, each of them, all of them. I hope that people in our audience might even rewatch this later and listen to you all a second time. It really, there's a lot of wisdom coming up right about now. Danie, I want to circle back to you and ask you your own question. You knew this was coming. So what's missing out there, Danie? What do you want to see?
I will tell you, I do feel like there are not enough. I come back to this idea of practice, and practice for me, it looks like groups, it looks like support groups, it looks like workshops, it looks like fairs, where people can get resources and understand what's available. I don't feel like there's enough access. And that means access to someone like me as a therapist, access to someone like Mark, access to Bevette. The idea of access in terms of being able to get to some of these things, information isn't shared in the way that it really needs to be shared, so that people can kind of build their own kind of network and their own kinds of supports. So I want to see more opportunities where people get to have access to things like that, access to therapy, access to groups, workshops. I think about when we think about social determinants and we think about creating services around social determinants, that means something like mental health counseling tied to something like financial literacy or tied to health literacy, and literacy just in terms of the idea of education, right? How do you help people get to higher wage, and what does that look like? How do you build wealth, right? So how do you tie some of these things? Because that ultimately is true healing.
Yes. Amen. Yes. So many topics that could come off of that one right there. I'm at least going to, right when you went to wealth, I mean, I think that that's we've watched in this COVID crisis, and we've certainly watched at Wellspring in terms of housing, that there's a lot about just helping people. I mean, of all the masses of people, of families who need help, we know that as current systems are designed, maybe 10% of the people, 10% of the families can get the help they need. Probably not. I mean, I think the public kind of thinks that the agencies have it covered. There's these limitations on all of us nonprofit partners. It's not that we don't have a bigger vision. It's that we don't have bigger funding or systems in place or government working effectively with us or partnership. I mean, there's so much of that's ineffective in terms of true community solutions. And then within that, let's say 10%, this is my easy math, that is not a data point, but it's certainly less than 20, I think it's closer to 10, that then we want to help. There's a question in the chat about where do families go if they can't afford counseling. I think that what people need to know is these services aren't readily out there, not because nonprofits don't want to serve them, it's because we haven't, as a citizenry, demanded this. We haven't demanded it of our public policy, our public officials, and so people get into debates about things like homelessness because it's ugly. You see it in the newspapers because people don't like to look at it, or they argue about their taxes in a totally separate conversation, or they argue about behavioral health in a different conversation. These things I know the panelists know together. I know Wellspring and Childhaven know well together. that when you get into social determinants of health, that's what Mark was talking about early on in terms of when he referred to his family's ACEs score, adverse childhood experiences, that there's an aggregated effect on children and families of this kind of trauma. And it takes big solutions. It takes ambitious solutions. It takes people like the people watching right now and your friends and your neighbors and your community to really rise up, to invoke a revolutionary term, Mark, to rise up and support the kind of healing work that truly would be revolutionary in our community. I really want to just tip my hat and say thank you to Danie and to Bevette and to Mark Faduel. If we were all gathered in a room together, I know the audience would be giving you a standing ovation. I hope that some of them will just randomly write thank you notes either to you or to teachers, because you all are doing the true work. It is so important, and we're so thrilled for the team who brought this conversation together, to Seattle Bank, who underwrote this conversation. You know, it's easy to look at the financial industry and go, hey, they're part of the problem. Well, in this case, they're part of the solution, and I really want to thank them for that. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time over lunch to have this conversation. Oh, and here's a nice note coming in from our CEO, Heather Fitzpatrick. Thank you for all the work you do on behalf of children, youth, and families in our community. Yeah, thank you absolutely to our panelists, to our audience, to our staff, to our teachers, our housing stability specialists. I'm going to give each one of you, I was purposely trying to save about 3 minutes, so you each have one. I'd love for you to just give some parting words of what gives you hope in the face of families, children healing from homelessness. What's going to give you hope on the road ahead? Whatever order you like, just go for it if you feel inspired.
I think one thing, there's many things that give me hope. I do believe that love is reflected in love, and that's that parallel process that you hear a lot of therapists talk about. That you think about when you really felt loved, you performed well. You made mistakes, but you weren't scared to make mistakes, right? The other thing that gives me hope is that I think there's more and more individuals in our country that are constructively dissatisfied with the status quo. And that probably is the foundation of revolutionary changes. Constructively dissatisfied with the status quo.
I am writing down constructively dissatisfied while I wait for Danie or Bevette to say what gives them hope.
I'll go ahead. You know what gives me hope is it's opportunity, right? It's opportunity around connection. It's opportunity around belonging, and how we have opportunity to come together to create change. I mean, big or small, those things, and watching those things happen, having people come together, the idea of having opportunity to practice, to do it differently, that gives me hope.
And I would say what gives me hope is younger people, right? Because they are living their lives they're living their lives in a different way, oftentimes because they have to, based on what they're being faced with right now in the 21st century. But I think I'm looking at the way that the conversations they're having, questioning, wanting to deconstruct. And I think a lot of systems need to be deconstructed and rebuilt. And so, yeah, it's younger people are giving me a lot of hope right now. I mean, I'm a person of hope. I come from a people of hope because, if people that I have come from didn't have hope, I wouldn't be standing here today. Danie wouldn't be standing here today. And a lot of other people that look like us would not be standing here today.
I believe that is where we end this conversation. I was even going to say something else, and no. Bevette, amen to that. Blessings to each one of you. Thank you for your hope, for your inspiration. To those of you in our audience, thank you for joining us today. Go out there and build some hope, maybe some revolution, and be constructively dissatisfied. On that note, have a wonderful afternoon, and feel free to share this recording also with your friends and family for deeper discussion in the future. Thank you for joining Wellspring today. Great to see everybody.